series of fantastical events, a phrase we may have heard somewhere in a book that we've all enjoyed in the past. I wanted to talk about this whole idea of coincidence or chance as something that has been happening to me for a long time, but in recent days there's been such clarity over it that I wanted to just talk about it and chat about it. And I have got some notes. I've written them on the back of a jiffy bag, because in this jiffy bag I have 3 beautiful pens that I'm going to open in a few days' time when I open that big box of goodies from Cult Pens. But looking at this whole idea of coincidence, last week I went to an event at the Leeds Library, a brilliant little talk by Francis Brodie and another author, and my focus is on Francis Brodie. I'm in the quiet room or the reading room of the library, and I'm waiting to go through into the main hall, the new room, and I see some books on display. So I say to the guy on duty, can I buy one of these and maybe get it signed by the author in the break? And a little voice peeps up behind me. I'm the author, and that was Francis Brodie. Now, I've seen her many times in the library as a member. There are quite a few well-known authors in the library, but the thing about authors is there is no real fanfare. It's maybe a picture or a bio on the back or inside jacket of a book, and we go around our days, and particularly in libraries and places where you might find writers. Coffee shops is another good one, where people who have good acclaim, they've got a good series of books out in print, and you don't know them from you and I. You and I might be writers, you and I might be working on books that are important to us, but to the person at the next table in the library, we're just another person with a laptop or with an A4 book in front of us, and we're making our notes on the lined pages or the clean pages as we go, as we write. So Francis said, yes, I'm the author, and I was absolutely delighted, because when you go to an author event, often the table where the books are for signing gets swamped immediately after the event, and sometimes books even sell out before that happens. There were a number of books on display that night, so I was the first person to get a book signed by Francis, and I really enjoyed it. And I regard that as a great coincidence or a chance happening. And then when she was speaking on stage, she talked about the fact that she had worked at Bradford Technical College many years ago when she was in a secretarial or an admin role before she went to the States and worked in America. So immediately after the talk by her and Chris Nixon, everybody left the room really quickly and went to get their glasses of wine or their refreshments and to get to the book signing table. So I'm left at the front of the room with Francis Brodie. There's nobody else in. And before we go through to the reading room for the wine and the general chat with other members of the library, we talk about the fact that I'm working at the college where she once worked, and we have that common interest, that common history, in the sense that we were both working at a place and writing in the evenings. And in the previous video I talked about making the time for your writing, because the clock is ticking all the time. And I learned such a lot, and I commented on it in last week's video about the importance of making time, defining time in your diary. So I really enjoyed the fact, and I appreciated her story about the fact that she worked at the college where I am nowadays. But she went home after her realization of wanting to find more time for her writing life, and she determined that she could find 16 and a half hours alongside her job after work at weekends to work on her passion, to focus on pushing those words forward so that she could finish her first book. And that worked for her. And I've made that decision to push forward with my next book, not my first by any means, but to use that time more thoughtfully, more intelligently. I've always found that the more productive I am, it comes from being extra busy and having very little spare time, because the busier you are, the more you have to work to carve out little blocks of time, little units of free opportunity in which to add your words to screen. So that was a very big opportunity. But when I went to Ilkley at the weekend, I went to go to a ticketed event as part of the Literature Festival, which happens every October. And I went to see a Pakistani author who wrote a book called The Khan, and a Greek Cypriot author who wrote a book about a fictional story of an account of one of the last women to be hanged in England. Not Ruth Ellis, but a Greek Cypriot grandmother who was accused of the murder of her daughter-in-law. Now, what the lady who was there had done is read through all the newspaper accounts and woven a fictional story that worked alongside the way that the historic articles and archive information portrays the case through the eyes of the translator for this grandmother from Cyprus who was accused of a murder in London in the 1950s. But she's created a very interesting fictional story. I'll add the details of those two books and those two authors in the description here. But when I sat down, I booked a ticket online the night before, and I managed to get a front row seat. Now that on itself is a coincidence at what is a really busy festival with thousands of tickets sold over the 3-week period. But the night before I booked, I got a front row seat in Ilkley Playhouse. So I was literally 3 meters, 10 feet away from the authors and the host of the event. But when I sat down, there were a couple who came in next to me. I was wearing a t-shirt with a Mexican badge on the sleeve, and so we just got chatting about Mexico, and I discovered that they spend their time between Yorkshire and Vietnam, with a particular focus on the city of Hanoi, where the gentleman within that retired couple goes 6 weeks of the year to teach. So there was a lot of similarity between my time between Mexico and England, their time between Vietnam and England, both of us in Yorkshire and both of us spending a lot of time overseas each year. And that was another coincidence. After the event had finished, I went out into the foyer at the Playhouse. And one of the things that you and I as book addicts or book aficionados or collectors or book hoarders, let's be honest, book hoarders, one of the things we will do is seek out books that are for sale. And there are 2 bookshelves in the foyer, just by the ticket office, in the Ilkley Playhouse. And I was able to get 5 books, many or several of which I've been looking for quite a while. Let me show you what I got. Last year, I read a book called East of the Mountains by David Guterson, and I really, really enjoyed it. I found it very interesting. It was a very poignant story of a man in the last phases of his life and a journey that he makes that goes completely wrong. It's disastrous. But we learn a lot about his frailty and his humanity through the telling of the story. So when I saw this book, I had to pick it up straight away. It's called Our Lady of the Forest, and again, it's by David Guterson, and I'm really looking forward to reading this. Another writer I really enjoy, and I'm working through a series of books at the moment by various crime fiction authors, just to get a sense of their style or their character development for their protagonists. There it is, The Janus Stone by Elly Griffiths. Another coincidence, 5 or 6 years ago, I was working in Lancashire. I had a 1-week contract, so it was a very short process. I'd gone up to an Airbnb. I did a week's work in that particular location for a local authority. And on the second night of my stay, I noticed there was a book reading and event as part of a craft and arts festival. And I went to a church that overlooked the city, and in there, maybe there were 60 or possibly 70 of us as the audience, and there were 3 writers on the panel. I didn't know who any of them were, and I'd gone as something to do. I was away from home, and I wanted just some interest for the evening that I was away. And Elly Griffiths was there, and she talked about her latest book at the time. I forget what it was now, but she talked about her forensic archaeologist character called Ruth Galloway and the Detective Chief Inspector Harry Nelson as 2 separate characters. I didn't realise at the time that when you read her stories, they are deeply linked as human beings. And we have their relationship, their love story, their backstory between them as part of the crime drama as things develop. But I was able to pick up an Elly Griffiths book to add to my collection. I've got 5 or 6 of her books on the shelf over there. I've never seen it in a charity shop, and I've never seen it on display at the times I bought some other Elly Griffiths books from my local Waterstones. For those of you who've seen the channel for a while, you know that one of my absolute favourite characters in crime fiction is Detective Harry Bosch of the Los Angeles Police Department. I've read every single Harry Bosch book, and multiple times I've watched the series on Amazon Prime, and I always love it. But here's a book that I've never read. It's a book that features Renee Ballard, a young female detective, and Harry Bosch, who's retired from the LAPD and just works on cold cases from things that have happened a long time ago and have been unsolved. But this one, Dark Sacred Night, is a new book for my Harry Bosch connection and my enjoyment of the writing of Michael Connelly. The other 2 books I picked up, again at a ludicrous price, are old vintage Penguin paperbacks, and they're both by Graham Greene. The first one is called It's a Battlefield, and that one's not so old, it's only 25 years old. But this one, The Power and the Glory, is in a superb copy. This was printed in 1962. Graham Greene had been commissioned. Well, let me go backwards. He'd become a Catholic in the late 1920s, and in 1938 he was commissioned to go and write about the persecution of the church in southern Mexico. So 1938, an incredible time to be in these most primitive of the states of southern Mexico. So he went to Chiapas and Oaxaca particularly. I lived in Chiapas when I was 20 years old, and then I walked across Mexico. It's a long story and it's an old story. Forgive me if you've heard it. But I walked on my own across Mexico from the Pacific Ocean up to the Gulf of Mexico and then out across to the Caribbean. But this book, well, The Power and the Glory and another book called The Lawless Road, they came out of his time in the south of Mexico. But I'm absolutely thrilled to get this copy of a book that for me is so redolent of my experience of time in Chiapas. And Chiapas, again, right now, is going through traumatic times of people trafficking, heavy migration, a lot of cartel activity. The church is powerless to do anything, but also the state is not intervening in a very strong way. This is not me criticizing the particular governments of Guatemala and Mexico, but the control is not held in their hands. It's held by other people and other parties. So you'll want to know, how much did I actually pay for these 5 books? By 4 different authors, including a very special 1962 edition of The Power and the Glory. I paid just £5. Incredible value, and I'm really, really pleased with what I unexpectedly found at the Ilkley Playhouse. So I booked the night before and I get a front row seat. I end up sitting next to a couple with a very interesting international story about working in education, overseas, spending time between 2 countries. I then go through to the book signing area and I see a raft of books, and I buy 5 classic books that I'm really pleased with, and I wasn't expecting any of that at the theatre. Then I get to the little coffee shop area and I order a cup of tea and a Yorkshire curd tart. If you've never had a Yorkshire curd tart, you need to come to Yorkshire, because that's the only way to explain it. But chatting at the little hatch where they serve the tea, the volunteers make the cakes, they make the sandwiches, and they make the teas and coffees at the intervals or after the events that take place. And I'm chatting next to a man, and we just are talking about the programme we've just seen, the 2 authors, and we chat about where we're from. He was a man in his 80s, and he worked at Bradford Technical College in the 1960s. So how can it be that in 1 week, less than 1 week, I go to 2 events, I randomly meet individuals from those events which have large numbers of audience taking part and being at the event. Francis Brodie, the gentleman in the audience at the Literature Festival, and myself, all interested in books and literature, but all having worked at or currently working at the same college in our town. What are the odds on that? Is that, back to my notes again, is that coincidence or is it random chance? It's things aligning to be in one particular place. So I'm really buzzing by this stage in the afternoon. I leave the Playhouse having been to a brilliant event, and I go back into town and I'm walking along the Grove, and Ilkley Bookshop is called the Grove Bookshop, and it's a super place. It's a tiny bookshop, but it has a brilliant range of books available to the audience, whether it's visitors or residents of the small town. But it's a really well-stocked bookshop, and obviously, like any good independent bookshop, they'll order in anything particular that you want to get hold of. But in one of the windows, the one down the side street, was a display of, I can't remember whether it was 6 or 8 vintage typewriters. And I discovered that around the corner, just down the end of the Grove, past Morton's hardware store, on the next street, is an actual exhibition of vintage typewriters. So I'm in my element now. I've picked up some amazing books for £5. I've had coincidences with people just randomly placed next to me in the queue for tea and Yorkshire curd tart. And now I'm seeing information about a vintage typewriter exhibition, which I didn't know about, but that was just down the street at the Clark Foley Centre. And I took some pictures of those typewriters, and I may share those later on. But everything is conspiring very much in my favour for a great day out. So where do you sit on this whole debate of coincidence or random chance? For me, these aren't remotely out of the ordinary. My whole life has had all these sorts of connections and coincidences, and I think connections actually could be part of the title of this little discussion with you here. But what is your perspective on it? Are they coincidences? Are they connections that we were inevitably going to make that day when we left the house, and everything was aligned, the stars were aligned for us, for those processes to be present, i.e. you go here, this person ends up in a conversation with you, and you find these 2 or 3 things that you have in common, and it gives you some motivation. It gives you a sense of there is lots of good in the world. There is this connectedness between all of us that is always there if we are just sensible enough or open enough to find it, to listen out for it, and then to make that connection. Having been given a little clue or a little introduction, we find those things that are really good for us. But that's all I wanted to say. Look for the connections, look for the coincidences, and see whether you think this is something that is random, conspired by some other force for the good. One final thing about coincidence. I have a favourite coffee shop here in Bradford, and very often on a Sunday I will, if I can, I'll make time to go down there and just sit there for an hour and a half or 2 hours, maybe write 800 words, maybe 1200, but I'll have 1, sometimes 2 coffees, and I'll sit there and write. I really enjoy the atmosphere. The music is just audible, but there's also that constant chatter of people out for some social time with friends or family, or they're visiting town and they know that's the best independent coffee shop. So I was there, and just before closing time, I noticed the owner put a sign in the window, and I went up to take my cup and saucer back, and I said, "Oh, what's the message? Is it the Christmas timetable?" And very sadly, with an ashen face, he said to me, "No, I'm having a lot of difficulties, and with immediate notice, we are closing in a few minutes' time," which is their normal 4 o'clock closing time, and I have to kind of work out where we go from here. I was really saddened for the man. I've been writing and drinking coffee there for at least 5 years, and he is a really strong asset within the community, and what he offers is an important venue for creative people, for people who want to meet up with their friends and family. But it's an important place. Lots of people will go there from the university and study. Several writers go there. I know that some poets meet there on a regular basis. But without further notice, the venue has closed, and I was the last person in there. So I was able to share some comments and thoughts with the owner, and tomorrow I want to do what I can to support him in a different way. But what are the chances that I went in at that time? What if I'd gone in an hour earlier, and so I'd left at 3, and I wouldn't have known about the closure notice? I wouldn't have seen his upset, and I wouldn't know about it. And I would go maybe next Sunday or in a fortnight's time and realise that it's no longer there, or I wouldn't have known that it had been closed for 2 weeks and reopened without any awareness of it. But what are the chances that I went there, I was writing there, I saw the notice go up, but I saw his distress, and it was my role as a friend of that man, because we've always enjoyed going there, my wife and I, and it was important for me to give him some emotional support and to be there and to be available to help him over the next few weeks. But what are the chances of that? That was not a coincidence. That was something that was absolutely predestined, and I'm completely sure of it. And I'm glad that's what happened. I'm glad that I was there at that moment to give him some personal support. Glad I was able to say to him, look, I've been through the mill. If there's anything I can do to help, please, let's talk. And I'm going to be talking to him tomorrow. But all of these things, the literature festival, the books, the typewriter event, the closure of the cafe, just the timing of my trains even was superb. All of those timings worked out really well. I hadn't expected half of those things to happen. One of them was a complete shock. But all conspired for me to have a very rich and interesting and fulfilling weekend. And I got a lot of writing done in that cafe before leaving at closing time. What's your view on this? Do you believe that this is random coincidence? Or do you think you take steps in the day and you go in a certain direction at a certain time, and these things are predestined? I'm not sure. They happen to me a lot, but this last week, and particularly on Saturday at the weekend and Sunday at the coffee shop, bang, 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 all lined up. It's been a great weekend. I just hope this is useful. The main thing I wanted to talk about was the literature festival and the insane probability that I would end up with books by authors I've been looking for in my collection, particularly the David Guterson, the Elly Griffiths, and the Michael Connelly, and then the absolute winner of being able to get 2 Graham Greene books, and all of these for £1 each. I hope you're having a good week. I wanted to say, really, this is all connected with books and writing and productivity and putting yourself out there in the right time for great results and to get the things to happen, because you are doing the work. You're adding words to your manuscript, or you are, what I've been doing recently is prepping for next month's NaNoWriMo or my newly labelled Manuscripts in a Month project. I hope you're out there. I hope you're doing the work, because it's you that's going to benefit from it, not just in the sense that you may end up with a book that is worth repurposing or revisiting and turning into something really positive that can actually be printed, or you just go on that journey of self-development and discovering new characters and the joy and the personal fulfillment of writing a good story. Enjoy the rest of the month, and happy writing.